Do you think with the idea around hyperbitcoinization, more work should be done trying to consider, map out, theorize how the transition happened? What is at risk? What do we risk losing? What do we potentially gain? What are the risks of ignoring this? Because also in some ways it's not like everyone can come to Bitcoin at the same time if they wanted to. It couldn't support that.
Right.
So there are going to be winners and losers in the transition.
Yeah. So what is our duty as people who have been here for a while to think about how do we kind of best prepare for that?
Yeah, because, and I'm a hypocrite for this, but celebrating price rises on Twitter is one thing. But one of the things I think about when I see a price rise, I'm like, okay, this is going to make it more difficult for some other people
to be able to get in.
Yeah, it's like El Salvador took the gamble being the first one, and it is a gamble, and being the second one is less of a gamble, and being the third one is less of a gamble, but then that flips at some point. Being too late is a gamble. There's always going to be winners and losers, and are we spending enough time thinking through the consequences of hyperbitcoinization? Not just this utopian view that suddenly we have hard money and there's no money misinformation and everything's just going to work great, and
we're all cattle ranchers on a 100-acre farm in Texas.
Yeah,
right.
Are we really thinking through the local and global impacts of this? Because I don't see enough of it myself.
So I don't think we do, right? And having the tough conversations, most people don't realize that you can't give each person in the world a Bitcoin address and support the network. It just doesn't scale. With 1 megabyte blocks every 10 minutes, you can't onboard the entire world onto Bitcoin directly, right? So things like Lightning, things like channel factories, being able to have, I forgot this new protocol that came out, but it was talking about basically coin pools where you could have multiple people own a UTXO together, right? So there's a technology side and being able to make sure we can add seats to the life raft to let more people in. But from a social side, I don't think those conversations are happening in general around, because I think maybe the social circles you and I are in, but it's usually very pie in the sky utopianist. And the problem with utopias is that anyone who would oppose the utopia becomes like an enemy to the cause. And you can justify any means to try and silence them, dissuade them from having their opinion because they're a threat to the utopian idea, right? And I think the first step is being able to break out of that frame and be able to say, I disagree with you, and we need to have these tough conversations. And maybe that's part of what we're starting today. It's such a hard thing for me because just my journey with Bitcoin, it's always an individual person's journey. And I only have so much time in the day. So all I can do is try and bring people that are closest to me in, and maybe second, third order effects, they start bringing more people on themselves. It's not a fun answer, but it's what I know I can do, what's in my direct control, right? Because once you try and ascribe responsibility to a community, it becomes very hard to be able to get actionable follow-ups, have the ability to show progress, right? It's a tough thing to kind of reconcile, what is the responsibility of a community?
Well, so I have the personal journey you have, but I also have this collective journey where I have a bunch of listeners who are going on that with me, who want to hear certain things. And as a collective group of people, they don't agree on what they want to hear about.
Sure.
You go into the YouTube comments, they disagree on some guests and then agree on others, and they fight and argue. But I'm trying to take a group of people on a collective journey to understand the technology, how it works, how it's going to impact their life, how it's going to impact mining. So I have to go on that collective journey. Therefore, for me, I do have to think through the consequences, because it's important as a group of people, we understand these consequences. Well, what are we really saying with hyperbitcoinization? What is it we're really bringing? What are the consequences of this? So for me, it is. And I think we should have these tough conversations.
Yeah, I think you have a unique position with your platform and your podcast to be able to bring that outward, right? And you're bringing people along that group journey. And I think just having those dialogues and going to where it's uncomfortable, because usually if people are...
Let's go there.
Well, let's do it. Where do you want to start?
Well, what is the utopia?
Well, the utopia is this idea that not only is the money fixed, right? But it's all a level of wish fulfillment for each person you talk to about what it's kind of your fantasy of what you're going to do with your Bitcoin wealth in the future, right? And I think a lot of people want to this extreme decadence of live in a big mansion, have a bunch of cars, and which that's obviously fun. You want to have toys to play with to reward yourself for your wealth, but you're almost kind of neglecting greater responsibility back to your community, right?
But that's a personal utopia. That's
Sure.
not a societal utopia.
Well, I think most people view hyperbitcoinization as maybe their personal utopia, but the idea is that fix the money, fix the world is the thing that's often said, and that most of our problems in the world come from bad money. And I think my point is that malevolence in man is something that is so core to the human condition that fixing the money isn't going to actually magically fix all of these problems. It may reduce the incentives to do so, right? But it's not going to actually fix everything. Like there probably still will be war, conflict. The one quote I wrote down before coming here, I started reading Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. I got this from Jordan Peterson. The very quick line though is, the dividing line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart? And I think the idea that just because the idea that you have good money, you're going to absolve man of sin is just a very, it's a lot of hubris, right?
It's almost like that was written for today, right?
Exactly.
After the show, I'm going to tell you about why that's highly relevant.
Okay.
I can't talk about it
Not a
during the
problem.
show. But it's super interesting because we were discussing something. There's a situation whereby there's a decision that needs to be made, and it's a decision whereby there is a ethical reason to lie that might have implications, but it leads to a strong, a better position economically.
Okay.
And we were discussing it hypothetically. What would you do in this scenario? And we don't all agree. Jeremy's very much along the truth is the most important thing, and
Sure.
deal with the consequences. And me and Danny have been debating, well, whether if you there's an ethical lie, it's a white lie, maybe that's the right decision, but it would chip away at the soul to make that decision. I'm sorry, I'm being so candid. I just can't talk about it on the show.
No, we can talk. This can just become, just cut off the cameras, we'll make this a therapy session. We can keep it going. No, but there's an interesting thing about a lot of people in life. And for me, my Bitcoin journey, it's funny. For me, using Bitcoin as a tool, and like you're talking about like what we should do with our Bitcoin journey. For me, I've used Bitcoin in my life to be able to afford myself opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Being able to quit my job, go back to school, follow my passions, like going down the programming data science rabbit hole. And because it's something that really called out to me, but I wouldn't have had the permission structure otherwise. So I very quickly sold some Bitcoin very happily to be able to offer those opportunities to me because it made me a better person. And I was following like my inner calling, right? So this was the idea I was thinking about coming into here was like the idea of the hero's journey in Bitcoin, right? The hero's journey is a very archetypical story,
Yep.
Star Wars, Matrix, The Hobbit. You can look at a bunch of them, right? But you live in the ordinary world, right? That's kind of the pre-Bitcoin's part of the journey. Then there's the call to adventure. Someone tells you about Bitcoin. And what inevitably always happens, you ignore it, which is the next step of the hero's journey, which is denying the call to adventure, right? Yeah. And then from there, you finally meet a mentor, which I think in sometimes is like something like this podcast or Twitter or a book, right? You may not have an individual one-on-one relationship with them, but you find a mentor to take you through that journey of what does it mean to use Bitcoin? How do you secure your Bitcoin? How do you use a node, right? Like it's a very complicated thing to take the first full step into Bitcoin that you need someone to kind of coach you through that journey. And then ultimately you cross the threshold, you go into that world of trying to integrate Bitcoin more into your life. And there's a bunch of tests along the way to be able to understand what that looks like. And the goal ultimately is that you get, the idea is the abyss. You get to the bottom, like you're in a period of deep chaos, but you rise out of the challenge and you come back home and you go return to the ordinary world and you share that treasure with the community, right? And I think that's for me personally, like my journey with Bitcoin is being able to use Bitcoin as a tool. The one that pulled me onto this like call to like learn more about myself, follow my passions, but to also be able to come back and return that knowledge and share it with others and share the treasure. And I'm wearing your Real Bedford shirt today, but I think that's a very, like on a lighthearted way, that's a great example, right? Because like it was a little bit of wish fulfillment because when you were a kid, you wanted to start the football club, but you were able to take Bitcoin in a fun way and bring the treasure back to the community, right? Like it's one way of expressing that progress in that relationship with you and Bitcoin is that it starts out as this weird thing. For me personally, when I first started using Bitcoin, I was using it to play poker. because it was a way in the United States, they banned not online poker, but the bank transfers to and from poker websites. And the first thing I was like, well, Bitcoin's not bank transfers. And right, start playing poker. Bitcoin hasn't changed. But for me now, it's my mission in life is to get to the end of it and hand over my private keys to my kids. Very, very different. It's the same Bitcoin, but in a way I use it as a healthy way to kind of transform my value structure and putting me through that crucible to get to the other side of my relationship. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And you meet a lot of people who've been in Bitcoin for a long time, and you see these healthy transformations of they were using it for the Silk Road, and then they come out on the other end, they're doing something else, right? I think that's what part of what Hyperbitcoinization looks like, is going through this hero's journey and also being able to have it kind of make you a better person and having it be this grounding force. This is another Jordan Peterson thing of like chaos versus order. And for me, having something like Bitcoin that I have high confidence it will always exist and that it'll be there for my kids allows me to function and orientate my life in a certain way that I have deep trust that Bitcoin will exist. And I have that as a foundation for my own personal exploration in life.
Why do you have that such strong belief?
That Bitcoin will be around?
Yeah.
Right. So from the ability of the ways that it could be destroyed is ECDSA, like the cryptographic signatures break, or SHA-256 breaks. Everything else will be really inconvenient, but it won't actually destroy Bitcoin. And it's one of these things where I can, keep my private keys locked away for 10, 15 years. And as long as some miners out there continuing to mine, it's so resilient. You need so little effort to be able to keep the network alive from a sense of nation, like global wide attack. And it's every day that Bitcoin's around, it's more likely that it's going to be around tomorrow and so on, like the Lindy effect. So it's one of these things where maybe that's a bad proposition to think that. Maybe it's a faulty assumption. I haven't encountered a threat model yet that's actually scared me to the point where I think that's not going to happen. But it's also why, it's not the only value in my life. I have my family, I have my wife. There's a lot of other things outside of Bitcoin that I'm grounded to, and I use Bitcoin as a tool to achieve those ends.